The day a young English student met his idol. It was a rainy Saturday morning in London. The streets were wet, and the sky was covered with thick clouds. In the middle of the city, there was a small bookstore called the Book Corner. It was a quiet place, filled with the smell of old books and the soft sound of pages turning. The owner, Mr. Johnson, was a kind man who loved books and loved to help people find the right one. On this particular morning, a young student named James was walking towards the bookstore. He was excited but nervous at the same time. James was 16 years old and loved to read. His favorite books were about adventure, magic, and history. But there was one author who James admired more than anyone else in the world: David Smith. David Smith was a famous English writer who had written a series of books called The Adventures of Albion. These books were full of mystery, magic, and amazing adventures. James had read the entire series 3 times. He had all the books on his shelf, and he had even dreamed of meeting David one day. As James approached the bookstore, he noticed a large sign outside that said, "David Smith book signing today at 2 p.m. James stopped for a moment and stared at the sign in shock. Was this real? Was David Smith actually coming to the book corner? James couldn't believe it. He had read about book signings before, but he never imagined he would get the chance to meet his idol. "I have to go," James thought to himself. He quickly ran into the bookstore to make sure it wasn't a mistake. Mr. Johnson smiled when he saw James. "Ah, James. I see you're excited." "Yes, David Smith is coming today. He will be here to sign books at 2 p.m. James couldn't hide his excitement. "This is amazing," he said. "I've been reading his books for years. I can't believe I'm going to meet him." Mr. Johnson nodded. "I know how you feel. David is a very popular author. He's a kind man, too. I'm sure you'll have a great time." James spent the next few hours wandering around the bookstore, eagerly waiting for 2 p.m. He could hardly think about anything else. Every time he thought about meeting David Smith, his heart raced with excitement. "What will I say? What if I get nervous? What if I don't know what to say?" He asked himself over and over. At 1:50 p.m., James noticed a small group of people beginning to gather near the back of the store. Some of them were holding copies of David Smith's books, and others were chatting excitedly about the event. James joined the group and waited. He felt his palms sweating and his heart beating fast. Finally, at exactly 2 p.m., a man walked into the bookstore. He was tall, with short brown hair and glasses. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, and he smiled warmly at the people around him. "Hello, everyone," he said in a calm and friendly voice. "I'm David Smith. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today." The room went silent for a moment, and then everyone started to clap. James couldn't believe it. The author of his favorite books was standing right in front of him. David Smith looked just like he did in the pictures on his book covers, but seeing him in person felt like a dream. David sat at a table near the back of the store, and the people in the room started to line up to get their books signed. James waited patiently in line, but as he got closer to the table, his nerves began to grow stronger. "What if I don't know what to say? What if he doesn't like me? Finally, it was his turn. James took a deep breath and walked up to the table. David Smith looked up and smiled warmly. "Hello there," David said. "How are you today?" James felt his heart racing. I'm good. I'm so excited to meet you. Your books are amazing. I've been reading them for years." David smiled even more. "Thank you. That's really nice to hear. Which book is your favorite?" James felt more comfortable now. He had read all of David's books, so it was easy to answer. "I think The Lost Kingdom of Albion is my favorite. I love the adventure and the magic. It's just so exciting." David nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, The Lost Kingdom, that one was a challenge to write, but I'm glad you enjoyed it." James couldn't believe he was having a real conversation with his idol. "I've always wanted to be a writer, just like you. Your books inspired me to start writing my own stories." David looked at James with interest. "That's fantastic. Writing is such a powerful way to express yourself. What kind of stories do you write?" James was a little nervous, but he quickly started talking about his own stories. He told David about a story he had been working on for months. About a young hero who discovers a hidden world full of magic and danger. David listened carefully and smiled. "I think that sounds like a great story, James. Keep working on it. Don't be afraid to take risks with your writing. Every great writer starts somewhere, and you have the passion, which is the most important thing." James was stunned. He never imagined that David Smith would take the time to talk to him like this. He felt like he had learned so much in just a few minutes. David signed James's book with a special message, "To James, a future writer. Keep dreaming and writing. Best wishes, David Smith." James looked at the message and couldn't believe his eyes. It was a message from his idol, encouraging him to follow his dreams. "Thank you so much, Mr. Smith," James said, his voice full of gratitude. David smiled and patted James on the shoulder. "You're welcome. Remember, the world needs more stories. Keep writing and never give up." James walked away from the table feeling like he was walking on air. He couldn't stop smiling. It was the best day of his life. Not only had he met his idol, but he had also received advice and encouragement that he would never forget. The rest of the event was just as exciting. James stayed for the whole signing, watching as other fans got their books signed and talked to David. Every time David spoke to someone, he was kind and thoughtful, just as James had imagined. When the event was over, James walked outside into the still rainy afternoon. He felt like a different person. He wasn't just a fan anymore. He was someone with a dream. Someone who wanted to write and share his own stories with the world. He looked at the signed book in his hands and smiled. "I'm going to keep writing," he said to himself. "And one day, I'll have my own book signing too." James knew that meeting David Smith had changed his life. He would never forget that day. The day he met his idol and received the encouragement he needed to follow his dreams. And even though he was just a young student, he knew that with hard work and passion, he could one day become a writer just like David.
Please like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe.